All right, so here's a review of factoring. Remember with factoring, it's like the opposite of multiplying two binomials together. So I'm going to take you through a couple different examples. One just straight factoring, one where there's a number in front of the x squared term, one where it's perfect square factoring that's super easy, and then D is where you have a GCF and then you have to factor again. So 4 different types of factoring. We're going to need to remember how to factor in order to do any of the levels in this skill in 8.1. So factoring the following expressions. Remember in A, we have x squared minus 8x plus 12. So what I want to do, always look for a greatest common factor first, and since there is none, I'm going to break it up into two separate groups. And the first two terms always have to multiply to get to the x squared. So that one's going to be x and x. And then the last two terms have always got to multiply to get to 12. So there's a couple different possibilities here for that. We could do 4 and 3, we could do 6 and 2, and then we could also do 12 and 1. What I want to look at is this term here in the middle, this negative 8x, and I have a positive 12x that I want to make, which means both of these have to be negative, because a negative times a negative is a positive, and when I add two negative numbers together, I'm going to get a negative. So if I look at my possibilities, negative 6 and negative 2, when I add those two together, they equal the middle number of negative 8. So just to check, I always say check the middles. So I'm going to check these middle terms. I'm going to get negative 6x and negative 2x. And then if I add these two terms together, I'm going to get negative 8x, which is exactly what I want to get out of this. So my answer is going to be x minus 6 and x minus 2. Okay, here we go. Number 2, a little bit different because there's a number in front of the x squared, but still I want to look to see if there's a greatest common factor between 6, 13, and 5. And since there's no greater factor other than 1, I'm just going to go ahead and start factoring here. So I'm going to set up two parentheses and follow that same process. Now those first two terms have got to multiply to get to 6x squared. Here's where it's a little different than the first one. It's not just x and x. It could be 6x and x, or it could be 3x and 2x. So I'm going to keep that alone for a second here. The back number has got to multiply to get to negative 5. Obviously, it could only be 5 and 1, but one of those terms has got to be negative. So I'm going to first start with a negative 5 and a positive 1. And then let's just pick 3x and 2x and put those in and see what happens. Okay, so here's where it's important to check the middles. So I want to check, I know the first and the last are going to multiply to get to 6x squared and negative 5x, but I now want to make sure that the middle terms are going to add up to be a positive 13x. So let's see that. So I've got a positive 2x, and then I've got a negative 15x. And if I add those together, I'm going to get a negative 13x. So I'm close. I have a negative 13x, but I need a positive. So when that happens, all you got to do is change the signs on those green numbers, the 1 and the 5, because I have the same number but wrong sign. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this to be a positive and this to be a negative. So now I'm going to get a negative 2x and a positive 15x, which will give me a positive 13x when I add them together. So my answer is going to be 3x minus 1 and 2x plus 5. All right, moving on to letter C. Always looking for a greatest common factor. So between 4 and 49, there's no greatest common factor, and there's only two terms. So what's great about these problems are they're so easy to factor. If there are two terms and no greatest common factor, I look at the numbers 4 and 49. Those are perfect squares because they have a number that when it's multiplied by itself, it will equal that same thing. So 2 times 2 is 4, 7 times 7 is 49. So this is going to factor into 2x minus 7 and 2x plus 7. And that's it. That's as easy as it comes. Because if I multiply this out, I'm going to get 4x squared and then the minus 49. And if I check my middles, I'm going to get a negative 14x and a positive 14x, which will become 0, which means that there is no middle number or middle x term. So it's just 2x minus 7, and 2x plus 7. All right, last but not least, again, I've got a two-term problem that I need to factor. I'm going to look for a greatest common factor first. So between 3x squared and 12x, there's a greatest common factor of 3x. So I'm going to divide both terms by 3x. Bring the 3x out, I'm going to write what would be left over. So 3x squared divided by 3x would just be x. And then 12x divided by 3x would just be 4. And since in the leftovers there's no x squared term, it's just x, that's how I know I'm done. So 3x times x minus 4 is your final answer for that one.